Well, okay, good morning. Today, 26th of January, we're on lesson 26 of A Course in Miracles. My attack thoughts are attacking my invulnerability. What I want to first point out at the bottom of the lesson, and something that I'm not so certain is obvious to you all, but it becomes more and more obvious, is that I understand that we're all trying to be perfect and whole as God created us. But in order to be that requires no trying and no attempt, because we simply are created that way. There's a line at the bottom that I want to make note of before actually getting into the beginning of the lesson. It says, if you are doing the exercises properly, you should have some 5 or 6 distressing possibilities available for each situation, and quite possibly more. Notice, he's not telling you at this point in time that you shouldn't be distressed and I should be whole and perfect, and if you're whole and perfect, this would be happening, that wouldn't be happening. He's telling you no. You should be able to find things that distress you. You should be able to find them. We're here for that reason, and it's very important. And I think when we get back to the beginning of the lesson, we'll understand this. It's very important to remember that we're constantly attempting through these lessons and through the work that we're doing within ourselves to reestablish the reality of the power of our own minds as not being separate from our creative reality, our creative source. So the idea that we can find things are distressing because our attack thoughts are attacking our invulnerability is not an indication of the fact that we're defective, but it is an indication of the fact that quite naturally nothing that God created can lose its creative ability or the power to create, which requires us to get the result of our own thinking. So, simply stated, if we're getting the result of our own thinking and we're finding distressing situations, then our minds have not lost the power that we were created as and to have. And furthermore, if this is occurring within our experience, then we cannot be nothing, we must be something. The fact that we can get we can get the result of our own thinking, and in the misuse of that thinking, when I say misuse, don't mistake it to think that there's a judgment on that. It's misuse merely in that God's mind as creative is the mind that we think with, and therefore it is as creative as the mind of the Father. Okay? So it's not that, and obviously, if we look at yesterday's lesson, which tells us, I do not know what anything is for, and when we begin to really take a look at it, what you're going to begin to understand is that, when he says to look at the thoughts as meaningless rather as good or bad, and goes on to say you're not really doing anything, because God is the source of all meaning, and meaning is full in God, and if we're having meaningless thoughts, it's merely nothing. You can't be guilty for nothing. There would be nobody, God would not be able to judge you for doing nothing. Jesus certainly wouldn't judge you for doing nothing. There's nothing in this world that you can be guilty of, because quite frankly, there's no world and there's nothing really happening here. So the guilt that we experience comes from the idea of separation, and it is ultimately that where we want to get to in our own mind, where we begin to understand that we think we're separate, And everything, every single lesson that we do here is an indication that it's not possible to be separate. It's not possible to have lost the creative power which God imbued us with. And therefore, unless we are using it creatively, we're merely doing nothing, and you can't be guilty of nothing. There's a line where it said, God just merely feels or understands or recognizes that his creative power is blocked, and is attempting to help alleviate the block in the system of creative reality, in the totality of the creative reality within which we are all already whole and perfect, so that we can go back, in a sense, to where we think we have been stifled as the creative extension of God's love, and recognize that we can just pick up where it apparently left off. We can go to a spot through the healing of our hearts and mind that precludes the idea of separation as having ever been true, and we're restored to our natural state in the totality of the sonship that establishes the fatherhood of God. So remember, if you're finding things that are distressing, and there's a few other words in here that I'm going to remind us of, because in a sense we tend to ignore minor irritations, is a word that he uses, imposition. If we experience a sense of imposition, and we all know what that is, we feel like we're being imposed upon because our day and our time is important, and all of a sudden something comes along, or we're free and we're whole and we're perfect, and something seems to be not allowing us the expression of that, and we feel imposed upon. We all understand. Now that little sense of imposition is equal to a sense of depression, worry, anger, foreboding, or preoccupation. In the sense, it's an all or nothing thing. It's like I keep on saying, it's a binary system. The ego, which is the introduction of degrees, aspects, and intervals, would love us to think that there are, small upsets that need not be taken care of, because we really have to deal with the larger one, and the larger ones preoccupy our mind and hide, hide the actual, in a sense, false cause. And while we think we're making progress, the idea that we can still experience imposition is an indication that as much progress as we think we made, there's still a need for healing. There's still a need for forgiveness. There's a certain misunderstanding that people have about forgiveness. Remember, forgiveness is God's gift to us because of our wholeness and perfection. It's not his gift to us because we have done anything wrong. We are given the experience of forgiveness here in space and time, which parallels the use of our mind and reality as creative, not because we're defective in any way, but because we are whole and perfect. And it would be God's will for us to be restored to the wholeness and perfection because we never lost it. So in a true sense, the ultimate experience of forgiveness is the recognition that there's nothing to forgive. Not as a concept, but as an experience of recognizing that God would never be able to deny himself of his own creative reality, nor could we. And it's just been simply a simple misunderstanding that we've imposed upon ourselves. And the reason why our attack thoughts are attacking our invulnerability, and we could experience the result of our attack thoughts within our own system, within the body as a communicative device. Our body is a means of communicating. But it's a means not only of communicating with others, it's a means of communicating to ourselves. It's like a biofeedback machine that shows us the results of our thinking. in an experiential way so that we can come to recognize what we're thinking, not what we think we are thinking, but what in fact we are thinking below those thoughts that the ego would have us attend to, rather than look at the experience we're having and the fact that it's a result of our own attack thoughts attacking our invulnerability. When we read this correctly, it should be an indication of the truth of who we are. However, remember, the ego always fosters upside down and backward thinking, which is why we're told in another lesson, do not lament the world. Don't lament the world. Just recognize that whatever has happened is gone and start anew. My attack thoughts are attacking my invulnerability. It's surely obvious that if you can be attacked, you are not invulnerable. You see attack as a real threat. That is because you believe that you can really attack. And the belief that we really can attack comes from the experience from the first change that was introduced into the psyche of man, which is the change from our initial state of wholeness and perfection, where there is no sickness, pain, and suffering. The first change introduced was the idea of separation that changed us and turned us inside out, upside down, and backwards, so that our experiences are painful. Remember, in the Bible, early on, Adam and Eve, after they've supposedly eaten from the apple of the tree that was forbidden for them to eat, there's a line wherein which it said, and from this day forth, the experience of childbirth is going to be a painful one rather than a joyous one. And that's an indication of the backward nature. What they're saying is the ability to create becomes painful. What we make here becomes painful because it reinforces the condition of need rather than expresses the joy of the extension of creation. So this is because you believe that you can really attack. We really believe somewhere deep inside of us that we've attacked God. Now, it's an impossibility, but identifying with the error that has caused us to think entirely backwards, therefore totally wrong, becomes a true reason in our mind. And we believe we actually attacked God, so we believe we can actually attack each other. And what would have effects through you must also have effects on you. Of course, you must get the result of your own thinking, and therein lies the key to salvation. It is this law that will ultimately save you. There you have it. But you are misusing it now. No one's judging you for your misuse. Discomfort is introduced as a reminder that we need a correction for the misuse so as to show us a true use. But even the indication of the misuse eventually points back to the fact that we must have been created as something, because if we weren't created as anything, we weren't created at all and could not be experiencing any effects because we're not anything. So even in the dream of separation is the proof of the fact of our wholeness and perfection, and that we were created by a single creative power we call God and could not be separate from it. But you are misusing it now. You must therefore learn how it can be used for your own best interests rather than against them. Now, you will not be able to learn that if you keep on insisting that you're not misusing it. It's that simple. The arrogance of an ego that says it's not misusing it in spite of the fact that it's here, or, let me put it this way, the aloofness that comes about in those who have these momentary realizations of their own wholeness and perfection, and then use the concept based on a past experience to stay aloof and detached from the ego rather than utilizing the power of their mind to heal their mind of their need to be detached, because your need to be detached from the ego is your need and experience of being detached from God. So I sitting in the cave and sitting in meditation and sitting there as a guru ain't gonna get it for you. It's too late for that. That may have been an advance in consciousness many, many years ago, when the discovery that attachment, all attachments produce pain and suffering, but the attempt to detach from the source of pain and suffering is equal verification of the reality of that source, and that source is not true. So that may be an advance in an understanding, but the next step is the recognition that there is no source for sickness, pain, suffering, and death, because God would never have it so. So it is not so now, and it is not so in you. And it's just the misuse, the reverse use of the law of creation, which you take out on yourself, that's causing you the experiences that you have here in the world of space and time. Because your attack thoughts will be projected, you will fear attack. The nature of creation is God projects himself, which we are, and there's a true use of projection, and there's the false use of projection. In the Course, the original editor attempted to change projection to extension, as if God's mind would have the ability to have two different actions, but I assure you it's not. That's why the idea that we recognize that God creates by projection, and yes, his projection is an extension of his thought, but there is no difference between projection and extension, except in the need to differentiate, and that's all of the ego. God's not capable of two separate actions of mind, nor are you. You'll remember that you create by projection one day as well. Now, that's not a conceptual idea of projection as opposed to a conceptual idea of extension. It's an experience of your own love extending as the creative mandate, because you're imbued with the full power of your creator. The only limitation is you can't create your creator, but you can create your own creations through the projection of love and the extension of your own whole perfect mind. And if you fear attack, you must believe that you are not invulnerable. Now if you fear attack, you must believe that you are not invulnerable. So therefore you set up in your mind this condition called vulnerability, wherein which attack is something you're attempting to protect yourself from so as to not be hurt. Yet, obviously what this would be advocating is abject surrender in the face of what we consider attack, in order to discover that no attack could actually do anything to us. And ultimately that's what Jesus was here to demonstrate through his act of allowing himself to be nailed to a cross, only to prove that it didn't affect him in any way, that his wholeness and perfection guaranteed by God allowed for the resurrection and making of a new body. Simply because we seem to have made a body prior to that, why couldn't we make a whole resurrected body as well? That's the absolute power that we've been given in our creation. It can't be denied us no matter what we do and no matter what we think. And that power must be expressed, even if it's expressed in illusion, as attack on oneself and apparent attack on a brother. Now remember, your brother is just as invulnerable as you are. Now, we may not be alone in experiencing the effects of our thought, but we certainly could be responsible for what we think about the effects that we're experiencing and what we do with those. So the idea that we could experience being attacked from another would certainly be a great situation for us to apply forgiveness to see that nothing went wrong. And by the experience of the attack, we're blessed with an event that can show us that we're invulnerable. But that would require being restored to the way of the use of our mind that we were initially created with, not have lost track of within our experience here in space and time. So the idea for today introduces the thought that you always attack yourself first. If attack thoughts must entail the belief that you are vulnerable, their effect is to weaken you in your own eyes. Thus they have attacked your perception of yourself. The fact that you can experience a true, whole, perfect self at any given moment, at any given point in time, in spite of any way you felt in the past or anticipate you're going to feel in the future, is the recognition that that whole, perfect self remains whole and perfect and intact. And it is who we are. Never mind the dream of separation. The dream of separation is ultimately what's going to help you prove to yourself that that whole perfect self is still existent in the mind of God, wherein which you never left. So thus they have attacked your perception of yourself, and because you believe in them, you can no longer believe in yourself. A false image of yourself has come to take the place of what you are, and because you've projected, you've peopled your world with the reflection of the false image of yourself, you've projected vulnerability onto your brothers, you see yourself as weak, and possibly them as strong or weak, depending on your experience and how you use your mind, yet all of it goes to prove, ultimately, when we utilize these lessons the way they're designed, that we are whole and perfect. We've never left our creative source, and we are invulnerable. There's no such thing as death. You're eternal, whole, and perfect. Nothing, including the ultimate attack that we think can be made on the body, on our identity in space and time, murder, sickness, pain, unto death, has affected it. That's the nature of the resurrection. That's what Jesus, we can begin to live in the resurrection right here, right now. Not conceptually, but experientially, as we undo the false thinking and the misuse of our mind. So that's just a bit on today's lesson. Go forth and find things that are distressing. Find the impositions that you're experiencing. That's what you're meant to do. This lesson is telling you, asking you to find those things. If you're doing it right, you will find these things. Not if you're doing it right, you're going to be whole and perfect as God created. You'll never experience another problem. No. The lesson is designed to help you find when you think you've been attacked and can attack and undo that thinking. It's entirely and without the admission that that experience is occurring. You continue in the state of denial, and in the state of the denial, nothing's possible but continued denial and continued nothingness, where nothing is happening. And there's no judgment on that in the mind of God, because he can't recognize nothingness, nor can Jesus. So go ahead and find some distressing situations to apply the lesson to, because that's your assignment for today.